still a little early. We're just arriving downtown here. I got parking right next door, breakfast across the road, and a great big protest to participate in. What could be better? Anyways, we're going to try and put an end to these secret trade talks that'll take the corporations and make them kings of the world. Here's a good one.
The country because they didn't want us to know about it, but we are not going to let that happen. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. The same goes for every piece of land, drop of water, and gust of air that every trade deal affects everywhere across this continent. The history of colonialism is repeating itself. The first people of this land know a thing or two about agreements being forced upon them. Agreements never meant to help people, but rather to assert control and domination by the colonial government and its resource extraction companies. But the indigenous peoples of this land are fighting back, and the rest of us need to follow their lead. Recent court victories have strengthened land claims and turned the idea of crown land and group rights on its head. But this, and so much more, are under attack, and this may not be possible if the Trans-Pacific Partnership is allowed to go through. My name is Seamus Wolfe, and I am a local student, worker, and parent working with someofus.org to oppose this deal. This week, in this hotel and in other buildings across Ottawa, the most secretive trade deal ever is being hammered out. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is so secretive that elected members of Parliament are not even allowed to see it, and in the United States, only a select group of senators in Congress were allowed to see it and under supervision. If it wasn't for document leaks through WikiLeaks and other sources, we would only be able to guess what this so-called... We would only be able to guess what is in this so-called partnership. So what is the TPP? They tell us it's just a regular old trade deal and that there is nothing to worry about. But economist Joseph Stiglitz, not someone I would personally tend to agree with very often, had said that the TPP presents grave risks and it serves only the interests of the wealthiest. If passed, the TPP would cover a huge range of issues, from agriculture to the internet to the operating table procedures and environmental regulation. I can assure you, the TPP is about much, much more than trade, and it is not a good deal. The TPP is about cementing control over laws and policy into the hands of corporations and making sure that people of the affected countries lose any scape of control in determining the direction of our economy, our environment, and our laws. The TPP is about public health and health care, and it is not a good deal. In the 1990s, the battle over generic drugs, especially for AIDS and other diseases, was won. But ever since, big pharmaceutical companies have done everything they can to reverse these victories, and they've been doing it through trade deals like this. Médecins Sans Frontières says that a number of trade deals have reduced access to medicines by driving up drug prices. However, some provisions being considered in the TPP negotiations are so damaging, this agreement could belong in a class of its own. The other way that it affects health is that it would allow operating procedures to be patented. Next time you go to the you might need an operation, the doctor might say that she would love to remove that tumor, but the procedure has been patented, so she can't, or she has to do it in an old, unsafe way. Which brings us to the idea of copyright in TPP. TPP is about intellectual property, and I can assure you, it is not a good deal. Current laws provide copyright protection for 50 years. TPP would make that 70 and would expand protection to include the ability to copyright plants and animals and a whole host of other copyright concerns. Totally. The PPP also concerns privacy-related provisions that could lead to online monitoring and internet controls and threaten net neutrality. The TPP is also about our environment, and it is a very bad deal. The Sierra Club has said that TPP directly threatens our climate and our environment and gives new rights to corporations in the fossil fuel industry, all having a huge impact on our climate, water, and land. The TPP affects labor and manufacturing. This directly affects our jobs, our workplaces, and it undermines unionization in this country. Up to say a few more words, my friend and fellow activist, Nicole Desnoyers. Nicole is a local student, community, and Métis activist, and can we all give her a warm round of applause?
Alors bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Nicole Desnoyers, je suis une étudiante métisse ici à Ottawa et je suis ici avec vous pour dénoncer les négociations secrètes et honteuses qu'entreprend notre gouvernement. My name is Nicole Desnoyers, I'm a Métis student and activist here in Ottawa. I'll be doing most of my speech in French, I'll translate for y'all later. Alors le partenariat trans-pacifique regroupe. Part of my work inherently is tied to fighting the irreversible damages this government is doing to the traditional lands of the First Nations of Turtle Island. Right. This agreement will threaten the work that I and every other Indigenous activist has done to protect our lands. This agreement within this partnership will empower corporations to sue our government if environmental policies hurt their profits. To this I say shame. Shame. Encore une fois, le gouvernement people from all 12 countries negotiating this partnership to say no to secret deals behind closed doors and no to the TPP. TPP. No to the TPP.
No TPP. No TPP. No TPP. No TPP. No TPP. No TPP. We invited all the political parties here today. We invited the negotiators here today.
They are here, they're in the other side.
Negotiators who are staying behind these closed doors, so closed that they even put up stuff in the windows because they don't even want light into their negotiations.
It's a dark secret.
We invited the Conservative Party. We didn't get a response. We invited the Liberal Party. They said they support the deal. We invited the Bloc, but there's only a couple of them, so they didn't come. But we did invite the NDP, and today on behalf of the NDP we have the Honourable Don Davies, the opposition critic for international trade, who's going to come take our petitions and say a few words. So if we can give a round of applause, Don Davies. Before I do that, SomeOfUs.org has been collecting petitions from all around the world and Canadians. We have 100,000 petitions, almost 100,000 petitions that were signed. And today we are going to symbolically give them to Don Davies, who's going to take them to Parliament Hill for us. And we've been, on behalf of SomeOfUs.org and all of us here, we have Una, who is going to present them to Don Davies. I'll give a round of applause for Una. I'm sure she'll get the...
Thank you. I hate it when I have that effect on children. Good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. It is a privilege to be with you here today to receive these petitions and to witness something that the Conservatives seem to want to be suppressing, which is the involvement of the Canadian public in important policy that affect our lives and our country. I want to thank the organizers of this rally, in particular SomeOfUs.org, and all of you who have gathered 100,000 signatures across Canada and around the globe to indicate that citizens believe that trade policy should involve our citizens, not freeze them out. I just want to talk a little bit about transparency, because there seems to be a prevailing thought in the current government that trade policy has to be conducted behind closed doors, that it has to be done in secret. Well, I say not only is that morally and ethically wrong, but it's unnecessary. There are jurisdictions in this world that are publishing text of agreements to the public so that they can be involved and read what's being negotiated. In the United States, which is hardly an example of transparency, they allow members of Congress to go into the U.S. Trade Representative's office and read the text of the TPP, yet legislators in Canada have to find out about an Ottawa round of negotiations from a Japanese website 3 weeks ago. The government of Malaysia has even indicated that they will put any agreement before the Malaysian people for their scrutiny and approval before they sign the agreement. So there's examples all over this world of a better way. There is a better way to conduct trade policy, and the NDP is here to tell you that we are behind that better way. You know, we've just heard from Seamus that there are very important issues that are being engaged in these discussions. These discussions are not just about trade. This is called a Next Generation Trade Agreement that deals with many issues that were once the preserve of local sovereign governments. Issues like whether we have open access to our internet, whether we have access to affordable prescription medicines, whether we can label our food to tell consumers what they're consuming, and, importantly, whether we preserve the ability of local Canadian governments to legislate and regulate in the public interest without being afraid of being sued by multinational corporations. That has to be stopped.
Yep, period on that.
Finally, I just want to say a few words about human rights. The NDP believes that human rights should be important features of all economic pacts, same with democratic development. Well, I think that's even more so in the TPP. We have countries participating, meeting behind closed doors right now that are not democracies, that do not allow free elections, that imprison dissidents, that do not allow normative freedoms like freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the ability to influence their governments, freedoms to run for political office. What we are doing here today is actually illegal in some of the countries that are participating in these negotiations. Some of these countries have child labor and forced labor. And in fact, one of the countries, Brunei, recently passed Sharia law, which makes the commission of homosexual acts or adultery punishable by stoning to death. These are not Canadian values. These do not meet minimal standards of international norms. And we believe that Canada should be voicing loudly and clearly and publicly and advocating for improvements in these areas as a condition of any country participating in these TPP talks. That's using trade policy in the way it should be used, which is to improve the lives of citizens, which is to raise environmental standards, raise democratic development, and improve human rights. We don't have to choose between those things. We can have increased trade, we can develop the Canadian economy, and we can make a better world. So I'm here to thank you for doing your part in helping to make our world a better place, and thank you for shining some light on the TPP negotiations. I'll be very pleased, and it'll be an honor to present these petitions on your behalf in Parliament when it resumes in September. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for Don Davies? I want to ask, if this is such a good deal, then why does it have to be done in absolute secrecy? Why is it that they moved this from the last minute from Vancouver to Ottawa? Because they didn't want people to participate and they did not want people to protest, but we have shown them. People all over the world are protesting. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Malaysia. These are all places that are going to be affected by the TPP, and these are all places where people are standing up and not allowing this terrible agreement to go through. Now, this would not be a protest if we didn't have some good old-fashioned jingles from the Raging Grannies. So if we can give a round of applause to the Raging Grannies, who are going to give us a few songs.
To pretend in this first song that we are not us, but we are the corporation.
Hey, I'm not a cigar. It's called We Are the Corporations, and we want to rule the earth. Oh, we are the corporations, and we want to rule the earth. We know the dollars and the cents that everything is worth, and every life means money from the moment of its birth. So let's all cheer for greed. We just want to make the money. We just want the milk and honey. Every day will be so sunny, 'cause we are in control. We corporations buy the politicians by the score. They need to get elected, that's what all the money's for. And they do what we tell them. They will even go to war for the corporations' greed. Now you know who runs the nations. Just the biggest corporations. Laws are only botherations, 'cause we are in control.
Thank you, Raging Grannies. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Uma. Thank you all for coming today. Well, that just about wraps it up. Thank you so much all for coming. Let's keep up this pressure. Let's keep making sure that these trade talks cannot happen in secret, and cannot happen without our participation. Thank you so much.